everybody, it is Dean Z, and I am speaking to you from Hutchins Hall at the University of Michigan Law School. Today, I want to talk to you about financial aid. Why? Because we are at the very beginning of the admission season, and financial aid isn't really a thing yet. So I wanted to give you sort of a giant overview of the topic to help sort of like give you a preview of coming attractions. And hopefully this will be useful to you. It won't be able to answer, very detailed, specific questions, because the whole idea is we're at a very early stage in the process. But I want to give you some stuff to think about for as you go along this road. 3 different stages that I'm going to address. 1, you haven't applied at all. 1, you've applied and been admitted, but haven't gotten financial aid information yet. And 3rd, you have gotten the financial aid information and you're not happy with it. So let's get started. You're thinking about law school generally. What should you be thinking about when it comes to financial aid? You can get some general information that's very useful from my favorite resource, the ABA requireddisclosures.org. You can go there, and there's 2 different reports that they have for all schools. In other words, like all the information for all schools will be in these reports. So one is about tuition and cost of living, and one is about financial aid. You want to download both of those, get rid of all the schools that you're not interested in, and then you'll have a great set of information for the schools you are interested in. Your starting point for thinking about financial aid and what this is going to cost you is, of course, tuition and cost of attendance. So you can, each school will have that information in the what we call the 509 reports. It's just a rule of the ABA, 509. It says we have to publish consumer information. So in the 509 reports, it'll have that information. And so that's your starting point. Like that's the most you will have to pay in your first year, plus, 1 or 2 or 3% increase over time, because in most years tuition goes up. And of course, this year we also had inflation, so that cost of attendance is going up, but it's a good ballpark, right? However, you should think about in-state tuition from that too. That is, some schools have in-state tuition that is quite different than their general tuition. So that is one, thing to be thinking about. See if you would qualify for in-state tuition. If not in your first year, maybe in your second or third year. Every school has, every public school, I should say, because I don't think this applies at all to private schools, but every public school will have a slightly different approach to this. So that's just something to be thinking about in terms of your overall possible cost. And then the financial aid bit of information will tell you how many people get scholarships of certain sizes. So I think the breakdowns are like up to half tuition, half to full, and then more than full, so full plus a stipend. And most schools have full tuition scholarships of, in some numbers, but usually it's pretty small. It's usually, 2 or 3% of the entire student body is getting a full tuition or more than full tuition scholarship. The biggest percentage I can recall ever seeing is 15% at a given school. So that tells you, maybe you'll get lucky and get a full tuition scholarship at a given school, but you're probably going to have to pay something. So that's just an important starting point. But you should also, another good piece of data that isn't as readily available, but you can get it from the schools, is what is the average debt of their graduates, and what percentage of graduates have debt. That's information that we have to pull together for the U.S. News and World Report, but I don't believe it's published anywhere by U.S. News and World Report, but all schools will have it. So if you want that as an additional bit of data, that could be useful too. So, you've got your starting point of tuition and cost of attendance, and then possible financial aid. Obviously, you don't know specifically what you will be entitled to or receive, but it'll give you some idea about the likelihood. And then there is also other forms of aid that you should be thinking about. I mentioned in-state tuition, so that is one kind of cost reduction. There's also summer money that many schools have for people who are doing low or no paying summer placements. Check out on a school's website whether they offer anything like that. You can call and ask them about this, or you can, if you go to a law school fair, this is a perfectly good question to be asking. Do they have that money? Who gets it? Do you have to apply? Does everybody who apply gets it? Know the whole framework of that, because some schools don't have anything, some schools have a lot, and that can really change your financial picture. The other thing that is a big factor in terms of financial aid is loan repayment assistance programs. Again, not all schools have them, and the details vary wildly, but that can really, I think of that as like an after-the-fact scholarship. If you paid full freight somewhere and then take your dream job is as a public defender, so you're not earning a lot of money, many schools will just completely pay back your loans. And then at the end of 10 years, the government will forgive those loans. So that is something to be thinking about too. If a school has those, bearing that in mind for when you finally find out what your financial aid picture is going to look like. All right, so that's the things to think about before you know anything about what your outcomes are going to be at a given school. All right, so now let's assume you've applied and you've been admitted. What are you going to hear about financial aid? Most schools will tell you either at or near the time of admission what's going to come next with financial aid. Some schools will just give you a scholarship, at the same time. Some schools will tell you this is when we're going to make these decisions. There's a variation there. It's perfectly acceptable to ask if you haven't gotten the information you need. I wouldn't do it immediately. So you get an email saying, congratulations, you're admitted. I wouldn't hit return and be like, yeah, where's my money? I would, give it a couple weeks. And if you haven't heard anything, reach out at that point by phone or by email to say, like, what's the financial aid process going to look like and what can I be expecting? You'll get a lot more information at that time. Now, let's assume third scenario, you've applied, you're admitted, you've been awarded financial aid or told that you're not going to get any financial aid. What do you do next? If you've been awarded financial aid and it seems like the amount you would like, then you're all set. But let's assume you got an award that is less than you hoped or you didn't get anything at all. Is there anything you can do? Yes. You can talk to the school. I don't like calling it a negotiation because I think that implies that you're sort of equally situated and just trying to come to consensus over something. You're in very different positions, you and the school, in terms of like the amount of power you have and the amount of information you have. So, don't enter it as if it's a negotiation. Enter it as, you need help from this institution. You want to attend this institution. You're excited to be admitted, but the financial picture is not one that is easy for you to work with. In all cases, they should be willing to have a conversation with you about this. I'm not saying that is actually true. I'm just saying that is what should be true. So you should feel very comfortable asking for a conversation with a financial aid officer, getting a full picture. In having that conversation, think about what will be persuasive to the school. We often hear from people who say, I'm just debt averse and I don't want to pay this much. I get that. I too am debt averse. Literally everybody I know in the world is debt averse. So that's not really setting you apart, and it's not a great case to be made for why you personally need financial aid. A school has a given amount of money that in any given year that its administration has made available to them, and they have to figure out how best to spend it to enroll a class that meets their goals. So you shouldn't be thinking of it as they don't like me if they're not giving you financial aid, and it shouldn't be like they're just not hearing me when I say I don't want to spend. It's like they also have constraints about what they can do. So go into it recognizing that, and don't get your feelings hurt if you're not getting the money you think you should be getting. They have constraints too, and they're approaching it as a frankly, as almost as a business, not as a kindness, which is how you're probably going to be experiencing it. So how do you have this conversation if you want more money? Think about, again, what's appealing to them. So think about, do you have money from other institutions that they might be competitive with? By all means, you should be letting them know that. Think about if there are matters about your financial background that they may not be aware of. You've had real socioeconomic challenge that maybe isn't evident to them. or you are, cut off from your family, or you already have a lot of debt from something else. Those might be things that they can work with. So give them information that they can work with. And then I wouldn't do this for every school that you're admitted to. The financial aid process is even more grueling than the admissions process. So I would limit this to the schools that you are truly interested in. I would do research on their website to begin with about what their rules are, what their approach is to this topic, and I would be sure to be following those rules. So if they tell you you can have a competing aid discussion but only one time and no more, be sure that you are putting yourself in the best position and giving them the most information that you can at once, because you're not going to be able to get a second chance probably at that school. And again, if they say they just won't have this discussion, ask them if you can at least talk about what your concerns are, and they should be able to give you some counseling that way. Bottom line, though, I think you need to make peace with the idea that you are going to be paying something, taking on some debt or paying something for law school. And that's usually a pretty worthwhile endeavor. I would say there are places, there are organizations out there that say, you should never pay anything for law school. That's not true, because even the schools that are giving full rides, they're not giving them to everyone. They're giving them to a very small segment. So if you say that's the only terms on which I'm willing to go to law school, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And it doesn't make sense. If you have particular career goals in mind, it often is not going to make sense to go for the cheapest possible option, the one where you're getting the full ride, if they can't get you to what your goals are. So you've got to take that into account too. You can't just sort of, like an automaton say, I'm going to go to the school where my debt will be least. You got to weigh that against what it is you want in a law school and be willing to pay something. I mean, I often think about this. I'll be talking to people about money, and I think when I went to law school 743,000 years ago, I paid, tuition was about $24,000 a year. I didn't have any financial aid, and salaries, big firm salaries at the time, was $60,000, which is much less than it is today. So took on debt and still managed to pay it off with only working at a firm for 3 years, and I paid it off. And so when people say I can't spend $25,000 a year because I want a full ride and not a 3/4 ride, I think, you know what, you can, and it's fine. It's a completely worthwhile investment. So think about rationally what you are willing to spend, what makes sense to you. I'm not saying get into debt, at $500,000 level. That is also not a good idea. But don't go into it with a very rigid idea of what you are and aren't willing to spend. Have an idea, be a little flexible, have conversations, and try and come up with as much information as possible. All right, I think that is all I have to say on that topic, but I assume that this will maybe elicit more questions, and I would love to hear them. Maybe we could do a follow-up episode if you have specific questions that I have triggered in your mind. Okay, now let's talk about questions that we've gotten in our comments. We got a question from someone who wanted to know, how do admissions committees view PhDs, specifically people who are getting a PhD at your institution, people who are getting a PhD at some other institution. At a baseline, this is a mark in your favor. This shows you are academically capable at a very high level. You probably are a great writer. You're probably a very, very strong analytical and critical thinker, skills that we really value in law school. A question that will come into the mind of the reader, though, is why the JD? Is this a step you're taking because you didn't have the career you wanted with your PhD, or was this the plan all along and you have a particular vision for how those two things will combine? I would say either answer is fine, but they're going to have questions about that. So I would be prepared to address it either in a short essay or an addendum. Now, the question of same institution or different institution. If it's the same institution, an extra mark in your favor. You are presumably already familiar with the place, you like the town, you maybe are, want to stay there. admissions committees really like to see people who like their institution. So that is a mark in your favor. Certainly not a mark against you if you're at a different institution, but maybe not a plus factor. I hope that is useful information. And now let us turn to the question of language, specifically the word And by I mean making a mistake, not like like I can't think of what to say next. So like you should on the side of spelling things correctly. That's not a very good example of using that word in a sentence, but you get my point. Often people pronounce the word ERR, they pronounce it air, like, because I think it's related to error, right, which you would say with an air. But I like to say it because I think it's the preferred pronunciation, but even if it isn't, it helps me always remember to spell it ERR and not AIR. I got an email not long ago where someone wrote that they had aired about something, but they meant and it just made me kind of giggle in a possibly immature, childish way, because it made me think it was sort of like a joke about passing gas, whatever. That's just my sense of humor. But you know, you want to get that right. So think about saying and then never making the spelling error. Get it? See what I did there? All right. I think that's all I have to say about that. I'm not sure that was the most useful language lesson I've ever provided. But if you have comments or suggestions, either about big topics or language topics, please lay them on me, put them in the comments below, or send us an email to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu and put vlog in the subject line. Otherwise, all I want to say is thank you to Dustin for your patience and support. And wherever you go, go blue.